Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Gadalizzi, the Executive Vice President of the American Supply Association. You are signed up for the ASA Women in Industry webinar entitled Achieving Success in Performance Management Through Effective Goal Setting with presenter Doug Dillon. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone to mark your calendar and plan to attend the second annual Women in Industry Spring Conference, April 15th through the 17th at the Embassy Row Hotel in Washington, D.C. Last year, we had over 80 attend the inaugural conference, and we anticipate over 100 attending this year's conference in Washington. The leadership team of the Women in Industry has prepared a fantastic program of educational and networking sessions that you won't want to miss. You should have already received registration and program details, but just in case, you can find more information by logging on to the code on the right-hand side of your screen under the chat box on the webinar screen. Also, mark your calendars for the next two webinars in this Women in Industry Performance Management webinar series. On Tuesday, June 9th at 10 a.m. Central for the session entitled How to Have Difficult Conversations in Performance Management. Then on Thursday, September 10th at 10 a.m. also Central Time for Using Performance Management Process for Career Development. If you are not a member of the Women in Industry division, we'd encourage you to become a member. Membership in the division is a company membership of just $100 and covers all the women at your company. Benefits include complimentary registration for upcoming webinars, admission to the networking reception held at Network ASA, along with discounts at other events such as the Spring Conference in Washington. Feel free to call us for more information on becoming a member of the division. During today's session, your mic will be muted. However, you will be able to send us questions for Doug during his presentation. We will then read the questions to Doug as we receive them. Today's presentation is also being recorded and will be available for viewing within the next few days on the My ASA page, which you will need to use your member login number to gain access. Okay, let's get started with today's session. Doug Dillon is the Director of Professional Development for the American Supply Association's Education Foundation. His responsibilities include elevating the people development capabilities of ASA member organizations and driving performance management, leadership development, learning development management. He has served as Director, Talent Management for First Supply, a Midwest-based plumbing, heating, and industrial PVF distributor. Prior to that, he was Director of Global Sales, Learning, and Development for the Kohler Company, a global plumbing manufacturing organization, where he served for nearly 10 years. His responsibilities included learning, sales strategy development, succession planning, and process improvement for the sales function internationally. Among Doug's credentials, he is a Master Certified Facilitator for an industry-leading leadership curriculum and holds certifications in more than a dozen curricula. He has spoken at international conventions for ATD, the Association for Talent Development, and ISPI, the International Society for Performance Improvement. This morning's session, Doug will discuss achieving success in performance management by effective goal setting, where we'll explore the importance of writing meaningful, clear goals at the beginning of the performance management process. We'll look at the S.M.A.R.T goal methodology to minimize surprises in the end-of-the-year discussions. With access to some of the actual goals written by warehouse and sales managers, we'll tweak them to demonstrate how a little extra time up front will pay off later. Finally, we'll fast forward to a performance management discussion and examine the impact of both poorly written and well-written goals on the employee. Doug, take it away.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the nice warm welcome that you've given me, and I'm pleased to be able to be with you on the very first webinar series for the Women in Industry organization. Over the next couple of months, what we're going to do is investigate this performance management concept. It's key within the organization to really see how we are able to look at using performance management as a tool for us in our future. But before we get started in that, I want to make sure that we're understanding what the scope is today. Mike did a great job of sharing with us that we're going to focus on the goal setting aspect of performance management. We could talk all day long about different aspects of performance management, but today we're going to focus solely on the goal setting side and showing how important it is for us to be able to do the upfront piece correct. So before we get started, we're going to take a look at utilizing what different perceptions are of performance management. And the first thing we're going to do is look at performance management by wearing the hat of the manager. So I'm going to open it up for some discussion here. For those of you who are able to see the navigation field, go ahead and click the plus sign next to the chat box. And what I want to do is capture some perceptions that managers have of performance management. So those of us who are on the call today who are managers, go ahead and type in a few perceptions that you have about your employee performance review process or performance management, and we'll capture a couple of those to see what managers tend to think about their performance management. Go ahead. Let's see, the first one, someone says, I don't like it. Okay, that's very, very good. That's one of the things that we hear from many people. What else? Someone else said, yuck. I can appreciate that. What else? It's a lot of work, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. It can be an awful lot of work, especially if we're doing it right. What are some other thoughts that people have? Employees don't take it seriously. Absolutely. That's really difficult. It formalizes ongoing processes. Excellent. Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people, when they're taking a look at what performance management means, is we look at it in maybe a negative sense. And in fact, one of the things that it can do for us is give us not such a good perception, because we all may have some opportunities in the past where it wasn't necessarily a positive thing for us. And maybe this was our reaction when we think about performance management, especially with our manager hat on. So here are some other things that people have said. Wow, they're always uncomfortable. I just want to get them over with so HR will get off my back. Oh, I dread those conversations. I never know what to say as a manager. I struggle all the time with that. And the last one there, I'd rather have a root canal. All right, well, that's painfully obvious, obviously. But that's what managers sometimes say about performance management. And our goal in our discussions today is to perhaps change that a little bit. But let's take off the manager hat for a second, and let's put on the employee hat, because guess what? We're all employees in addition to being managers. So let's take a look at what some people say as employees in the process. And you know what? Sometimes employees have some very similar things to say about performance management, but from the other side of the table. Let's take a look at what we see. Now, they're always uncomfortable. That was similar from the last one. I wonder what my manager is going to bust me for this year. Absolutely. Yeah, she just wants to find a way to reduce my merit pay. Absolutely. A lot of times people have that perception as well. I dread those conversations. That's the same as the managers as well. I'd rather have another root canal. But from the employee perspective, yes. Unfortunately, many people, both managers and employees, have more of a negative feeling and perception about performance management. So it begs a question: if both managers and employees are not happy with the performance management process or the review system, why can't we get together and make it better? And if we do that, how are we going to do that? Well, my suggestion is we start looking at it from a tool perspective rather than a task perspective. Unfortunately, we many times think of performance management as a task itself. But let's think about what is a task. It's obviously that something that must be completed. It's one of those things where I have to tick the box. HR is telling me that I have to have these conversations with my employees, or as an employee, I'm forced to have this discussion with my boss. And it's just one of many things on my to-do list. Well, here's me ticking the box saying, all right, I have to go through the process. That's what a task looks like and feels like. What we want to do instead is look at performance management as the tool that it is, as opposed to something that I have to do. And if we look at the definition of a tool, it is an object that makes it easier to accomplish something. That's what a tool is. And you choose to do it. I want to have a performance management discussion with my boss so that I can get some good feedback. I want to have a performance review process with my employees so that we can set the right expectations, I can provide some feedback, and we can look for ways to make everybody more productive. So it's a mindset that we need to switch. It's a cultural shift that we need to look at and help each other move away from task and moving more toward a tool. But we have to have a starting place, right? In order to have a performance management discussion, we have to start with what we're actually going to be measuring. And that's the starting place that we all need to line up against and make sure that those goals that we've written or that we've created or that we have for ourselves are well written and well done. The process by which, this is very simplistic, but the process by which we go through performance management is, first of all, we set those goals. That's our starting line. Then we let some time pass, and then we obviously measure. We see how it is that we've done against those goals over that set period of time. So the very starting place is on setting goals. And many of us have heard this philosophy that Mike had shared with us in the intro, is establishing SMART goals, is making sure that the goals inside our performance management system for our employees and for ourselves follow the SMART goal methodology. It's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant, and it's time-bound. Okay? If we make sure that each one of our goals follow this methodology, the discussion that we have at the end of the year after that time has passed becomes infinitely more easy. Let's break these apart now and explore a little bit more about what the SMART piece does. So the first one is specific. That's what the S stands for. There can't be any ambiguity in how it's worded. So if there's the possibility that my reading of the goal could be different than the way that my manager reads the goal, then it's not specific enough. Then we have more work to do. We can't have a difference of interpretation. So much like I have the conversation with my 13-year-old son, his definition of clean my room is very different than my definition that he should use to clean his room. So if I set a goal for him to clean his room, he's going to think that he has satisfied it. I'm not going to think that he's satisfied it because we have a difference of wording. We have a difference of of interpretation of that goal. So that means we're not finished yet. I need to be much more specific with him to get to some descriptions where there is no possibility of ambiguity, or there is no possibility that his reading of it is going to be different than my reading of it. Our goals need to be specific. The M in the SMART goal methodology refers to measurable. So we need to be able to measure whether the goal was achieved or not, and it needs to be written into the goal itself or in a separate area in the goal setting process so that we know exactly how we're going to measure it. Okay? In my son's say, am I going to put on a white glove and have a white glove test that would be able to measure the cleanliness of his room? Probably not. But you see what we're going with this. We need to be able to have an objective way of determining whether the goal was achieved or not. In a sales organization, it's pretty easy to be able to do that. Also, in a purchasing organization, you can have some very specific measurable pieces. It becomes a little bit more difficult when you're talking customer service or some of the other types of things that are a little bit more ambiguous. And so we have to work a little bit harder to get to a measurable way of defining whether we've accomplished it or not. But we'll go through some examples in just a minute. The A in SMART stands for attainable. So it needs to be perceived by both the manager and the employee that the goal is attainable. So if last year my goal was to sell $1 million, if this year my goal is to sell $450 million, okay, that's not necessarily an attainable goal. And the danger with having a goal that is perceived as unattainable is that you're going to tune that person out. That person won't have the same credibility, that person won't have the same commitment to be able to achieve the goal if they don't perceive that the goal is attainable. Now, that's not to say that your goal shouldn't be a stretch. You absolutely want to be able to stretch people, but you need to have some discussion with the individual if that person's knee-jerk response is, well, geez, I can't achieve this. This is completely outside the realm of possibilities. It needs to be perceived as attainable, but also a stretch. Otherwise, you risk that person being demotivated by the process. The next part of the performance process in making a SMART goal is that it needs to be relevant. The employee needs to have within his or her span of control the opportunity to be able to achieve it. So if you have a driver and you give that driver a goal to be able to sell $400 million worth of material, that's not relevant to that particular role. So you need to make sure that which you are assigning to a person is within that person's span of control. It needs to be relevant to the employee or to the role in order to be an effectively written goal. The last piece is time-bound. We need to make sure that there is some sort of a connection to time. And in most cases, it's going to be achieve these things by the end of the rating period. And most companies will have an end-of-year rating period that starts January 1st and ends December 31st. So if that's the case, many of our goals, as long as they have achieved by the end of the rating period, satisfies this particular area of the SMART goal methodology. But there may be other goals that have other ending points that you want to be able to guide. And for example, if you know that the first part of the year might be a slower time period, maybe you have a time-bound element in a goal to take a training course within the first 60 days of the year, and that can help to best use the time and energy around the slow times to be able to direct some development activities. So many times it's going to be at the end of the year, but it really depends on what the goal is. In any event, there needs to be a time-bound element. So that, in a nutshell, is the SMART goal methodology. And I guarantee those discussions at the end of the year will go much, much easier if your goals are written well from the very beginning. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be some pinch points along the way, but my mantra around performance management is that there shouldn't be any surprises at the end of the year. I should know, walking into that conversation with my boss, whether I have hit or missed every one of my goals. If they are very specific, if they're measurable, and they hit the other pieces of the SMART goal methodology, I should know what my boss is going to say about me so that there shouldn't be any surprises. And if you remove the element and opportunity for surprises, a lot of those adjectives that we talked about at the beginning of this seminar disappear. It doesn't become like a root canal surgery procedure. It doesn't become something that we dread because we know exactly what that message is going to be. So let's look at some examples. And by the way, these are live examples that I pulled from actual people within our industry as appear on performance management forums. So there's a couple here. The first one, as you can see, is build continuity with my team. Okay. What the heck does that mean? Maybe this particular manager has had some difficulty with turnover in the past, that we want to be able to reduce the amount of turnover. But I don't really know because it doesn't say. The next one is follow up with customers on a more regular basis. Okay, well, what does more regular basis mean? Because it could mean every single day to one person, and it could mean every single quarter to another person. Again, walking into that performance management discussion at the end of the year, if there's the possibility that one person thinks one thing and another person thinks another thing, then it's not a very well-written goal, that it's not specific enough. We need to do a little bit of homework with this particular one. The last one that we've got is gain more productivity through technology. Okay, well, that sounds great, doesn't it? Everyone would love to be able to increase productivity, and certainly utilizing technology is a good way to do that. But what does that exactly mean? First of all, how are we going to measure what more productivity is? And what pieces of technology are we going to use? And in terms of gaining productivity, so if I'm a picker, if I pick one more order in all of 2015 than I did in 2014, does that mean I'm a success with this? Is that how my manager would say, well, you know, I picked 18,000 lines last year, and this year I picked 18,001 lines. I guess I have met this expectation, and in fact I've exceeded this particular goal. Is that really getting us toward gaining productivity? So none of these particular goals are all that great, because obviously they give us the opportunity to scratch our head and say, not really sure if it's getting us what we want. So let's take a look at some other types of goals and how we might make them mirror more closely the SMART goal methodology. The first one is increase PBF gross margin dollars by 12% over prior year in the Gotham City branch. How are we going to measure that? We're going to measure that with the financial statements that are produced by the organization. I'm going to weight that at 30%, and we're going to talk about weighting of goals a little bit later in our discussion here. So let's place that on hold for a little bit. And the deadline for completing this is end of the year, 12/31 at the last day of the year. So I know that in my definition of increasing the gross margin dollars in the PVF category 12% over that prior year in this particular branch. Okay, it's a very specific goal, very difficult to argue whether it happened or it didn't. I should be able to walk into my performance management discussion knowing that I either hit it or I didn't hit it. That should be the only thing that the discussion is around. I either did it or I didn't, so that there aren't any surprises. Obviously, like I said, when it comes to sales goals and many purchasing goals, they're pretty straightforward. But when we get into a little bit more esoteric areas, it becomes a little bit more difficult, and we have to be creative with how we do our measurement and our goal writing. But certainly, this is a much better goal to minimize the chance of surprise once we get to the end of the year. Let's look at another one. Complete 2 e-learning courses on time management with minimum scores of 80% on each assessment. How are we going to measure that? Through certificates of completion and scores, either from the ASA Learning Management System or our own, or I can print one out if it's a vendor-supplied course. I'm going to weight that 10%, and this one needs to be done before the first half of the year is over. Okay, so I get that maybe I'm not so good at time management, that together my manager and I, or the Human Resources Department, is going to help us define some courses on time management that I can supplement that particular skill gap that I have. And I not only need to take it, but I need to achieve a certain score on the final assessment to prove that I've been able to incorporate some of that. Again, very, very specific. I know that I've done it or I haven't done it. I've either accomplished it by the deadline or I haven't. Again, a much better goal, but much better or well written relative to some of the other ones. So our job now is we're going to do a little action. This is where it comes to the fun part, where we take some actual poorly written goals and we're going to do some tweaking of those goals to make them better. Okay? So this is where the action comes from. So here is our first goal. Keep your area in the warehouse clean. Again, this is a live real goal that I have seen on warehouse workers' performance management systems. We need to figure out a way to keep our area clean, and we need to upgrade this particular goal to make them specific and measurable. So I'm going to open this up. Again, let's use our chat function on this and go ahead and type in some suggestions that you might have on how we can take this particular goal and make it better. There's no right or wrong answers. Well, there might be some wrong answers, but there certainly could be lots and lots of right answers in this too, a number of different ways that we could go. So go ahead and type in some thoughts that you might have on how to make this goal of keep your area of the warehouse clean. Let's take a look at some of the things that I have here. One goal could be to make this one better. 0 boxes, trash, or out-of-place tools in your area of the warehouse by shift end each day. Floors are swept weekly. Okay, assuming that this is an attainable goal, that the person has the physical capabilities to do this, assuming that it's relevant to them. If they are a warehouse person, this certainly would be relevant to them. And we're going to put some measurement pieces, weighting, and deadlines to it. So the measurement is that the manager is going to have daily and weekly visual inspections. We're going to put some weighting on it, and we're going to have this be a full year deadline. Okay. Another person suggested keep the warehouse clean daily. That's great because now it actually puts some sort of a measurement on it. I would suggest we still need to find some ways of defining what clean means. What is the definition of clean? Again, going to my 13-year-old son, he's going to look at the word clean very differently than I do. So any way that we can make it very, very specific and describing what the behaviors need to be will make this goal even better. This certainly is a better goal, and we need to take off that keep your area of the warehouse clean. Let's do another one. Provide top-notch customer service. This is awesome, isn't it? Yes, it would be great. I would love to make sure that every customer service, every driver, every salesperson, every collections and credit person in our organizations had this as a goal, provide top-notch customer service. But it's not a very good goal because it's not very specific. It's not necessarily measurable. How are we going to make sure that my definition of good top-notch service is the same as what we want our people to have as their definition? This particular gal in on the screen in front of us obviously has one interpretation of great customer service, but that might not necessarily be all of ours. So what are some suggestions that we could give the person who has this as their goal to be able to make this goal more specific and more measurable? Who's got some thoughts? Go ahead and type in the chat functions on how we might alter provide top-notch customer service to make it more measurable and specific. While you're doing that, I'll share some thoughts that I have with this one. How about increase customer service ratings by 5%, calls returned in 24 hours, information provided is 100% accurate, and gross margin dollars for existing customers increases 5% over last year. Okay, those could be potential descriptions that could help me provide better customer service. Good customer service is not specific. These are very, very specific. Now let's see how we're going to measure these. So we're going to take a look at utilizing a customer survey. So our organization is going to reach out to our customers once a year and get some feedback from the customers. So on those scores that we get from our discussions with people, we're going to make sure that those ratings are going to increase by 5%. Again, we're making progress for those customers that are assigned to me, that I'm going to get feedback on the survey that shows that their level of customer service will increase. I'm going to make sure that those calls are returned. And how am I going to measure that? Through some random manager checks. The manager is going to check and make sure that my call logs, or is going to talk to some of my customers to see how well I'm doing returning those calls, that I'm going to provide accurate information. How is that going to happen? Again, with some manager checks, perhaps looking at some order reconciliations to make sure that I've provided the right information to the customers about lead times, about quoting prices, about installation dates, whatever that might be. And I'm going to look for some increased sales from my existing customers, because that's an indication that I'm providing good customer service if we have return customers that are continuing to purchase from us. That's going to be measured by financial statements. How are we going to weight that? Obviously, we're going to take a look at what some of the other things are on our plates to be able to determine what the weight is, and we're going to have a deadline on it. That is much better. Let's take a look at what some of you guys have said. Responding to customers within 30 minutes, awesome. I was very similar with that. Answer the phone 100% of the time. That says, good morning, thank you for calling, this is Bill speaking. Excellent suggestions. Those are measurable, those are specific, and again, my suggestion on how to actually measure those would be some random manager checks with that. And certainly a customer survey. That's excellent. Thank you. The next one is that suggestion someone had is take daily initiative in providing top customer service by being on time, responding in a timely manner within 12 business hours. Excellent. Improve customer experience to an average of 95 and above. A good way of doing that. Excellent suggestions. Again, we're probably doing some sort of a measurement piece to determine what the 95 and above is. Excellent suggestions, very quantifiable. Someone else said, answer the call within 2 rings. Absolutely, that's very, very specific. It helps to identify whether or not we're providing good customer service. Great suggestions, guys. Thanks for all of your input. We're on the same page with this. Good job. One of the other things that I want to talk about today is the importance of weighting your goals. And I think this is a concept that not very many people in our industry typically use, but it's one that I would suggest you take a look at. So let's take an example of a guy named Jonathan who happens to be in an outside sales role in our organization. And let's say that Jonathan has 4 goals. The first goal is to sell $2.4 million in net plumbing sales from his territory. That's his first goal. The next goal he has is to generate a 5% increase in gross margin dollars over prior year. Excellent. That's good, so that he's not just doing goal number 1 in a vacuum and selling lots and lots and lots of product at 0 margins. He's got a goal on revenue and a goal on margins. Good. Goal number 3 is to submit his monthly expense report no later than the 10th of the following calendar month. Okay, very specific. Apparently that's very important from a payables and current situation to be able to do that. And the last goal he has is to increase customer satisfaction 2 basis points on the 2015 customer survey. Great. So let's say Jonathan in outside sales has these 4 goals. So let's fast forward to the end of the year. And let's say his results are thus. He sold $1.89 million. Oops, we fell a little short on this one. His goal was 2.4, but he actually sold 1.89. Okay, so we missed it on that one. Let's say his results on number 2 is he was supposed to generate a 5% increase in gross margin dollars. Oh my gosh, we went backwards on this. In fact, his gross margin dollars was 1% below what he had sold in the previous year. So we've had a very large swing in gross margin dollars here. Let's take a look at how he did in goal number 3. Attaboy, Jonathan. He actually submitted his expense report by the 10th of the month every single month during the year. Great job with that. And we increased our customer satisfaction score by 3 basis points. So we again exceeded the expectations for goal number 4. If each of these goals were weighted equally, then he made his goal on 2 of them, and he missed his goal on 2 of them. So if you round those out, basically you could say that he met expectations for performance during the year because he made it on 2 but missed it on 2. Now, how many of you would think if for the 2 that he made it on and the 2 that he missed it on, would you be very happy with his performance over the year? And would you be pleased to be able to have that discussion with him and say, you know what, Jonathan, you met expectations for the year. You hit 2 out of the 4. Okay? I don't think many of us would be too happy if these were the 2 that he missed in his primary role as a salesperson. So if we were to do something different, and if we were to weight these in a different way, perhaps we would say that goal number 1 is 30% of what you should be focusing on. Okay? Revenue generation from a salesperson is a very important thing, so we're going to weight that at 30%. In fact, gross margin dollars is even more important than that. We're going to say that that's 40% important. So 70% of the weighting in this person's role is based on revenue production, either net sales or gross margin dollars. Yes, expense reports is really important that he gets that accomplished, but we're going to weight it such that we're showing him that it's not as important for him to achieve that goal as it might be to achieve the sales goals. And likely the customer satisfaction goal, that's pretty important as well, but again, not nearly as important as the others. So if we were to recalculate Jonathan's performance in this, we would give him the overall rating of missed expectations, because the things that are of highest importance in our weighting are the ones that he missed. Likewise, if we reversed his performance and we said that he hit it on the top 2, but once in a while he was a little tardy giving in or turning in his expense report, so maybe he missed it on that, but overall he probably would have exceeded expectations if he hit them on the first 2 goals and maybe didn't do as well on the bottom 2 goals because they were weighted less. You get a little bit of a break on those because it wasn't quite as important. So I would highly encourage you in your organizations to look at goal weighting to be able to help employees prioritize, because I guarantee, be careful what you ask for, you're going to get those behaviors. So when you write goals, you're going to get people focusing on those goals. And if you weight them appropriately, that's the type of performance that you're going to get. That's what they're going to focus on. So I'm going to open it up for questions in just a couple of minutes. As a reminder from what Mike had said earlier, there are 2 more webinars that are coming up. Go ahead and mark your calendars. We've opened this up today to members and non-members of ASA, but the next 2 webinars are going to be reserved for people who are members of ASA. They are on June 9th. We're going to talk about how to handle some of those difficult conversations in the middle of performance management. I hope that you haven't had to deal with that as a manager or even as an employee where there was some contention in there. We'll give some tips on how to deal with that and how to redirect those conversations that might get a little bit tough to be able to get some positivity out of it. And then in September, we're going to talk about how to integrate some career development discussions within the confines of performance management. That gives you an opportunity to really add some more value and talk about what the next steps for people could be. So it's not just focused on performance over the last year, but it's a look forward. So I'm going to open it up now to some questions. Let's use the same chat functions that we've used in your participation earlier in the call. We've got a couple of minutes left for some questions. So I'm going to take a look at the chat function and answer some questions. Let's see, the first one is, I have a receptionist that reports to me. What are some suggestions for their goals? It's hard to measure anything for her. That's a great question. Receptionists can be difficult to be able to do. My suggestion is take a look at the job description and distill some things that you think are the most important from that in measuring goals. You heard some suggestions from people on today's call about answering the phone in a certain number of rings. My suggestion is find a way to measure some of that. Find a way to measure how people feel when they call in or when they stop by your office. Maybe there's an opportunity to make a couple of phone calls and do some surveys of people who have stopped by and give you their impressions of your organization when they were interacting with that receptionist. How did they feel? Did they feel welcomed when they walked in? How did they feel when the person answered their phone? Did the person allow them or give them the impression that they were the most important person to that receptionist when they called in? So certainly answering the phone in a certain number of rings, providing a hospitality or a service orientation, finding different ways of measuring that. But go to the job description. I think that can really help. If you're making some expectations of people, the job descriptions can really define what some of those things could be. That's a great question. Thank you. The next question is, how do you start the SMART goals when your small business has not had anything like this before? That's a great question. This is really, it's a culture change, or it could be a culture shift for your organization if they're not familiar with SMART goals. But the easiest way to do it is start to demonstrate it. One of the things that you can do is you can grab these slides from the presentation today and have some conversations with managers about SMART goals. Have them actually bring their goals with you to a brainstorming session and say, okay, how can we take the goals that you have for yourself today and make them more SMART? How do we make them more specific and measurable? And if you start with the managers, they can really help to drive that. It's not something that you're going to flip a switch and immediately your organization is going to be fabulous with the day after you share this concept with people. But I think it's a process that needs to happen over time. Another way that you can do it is you can certainly call ASA, and we're happy to engage in an advisory service engagement with you and come and do this for you. We're happy to be able to come on site and do some training, as we've done with several other members, to teach your managers how to write good goals and to do some role plays with them with performance management discussions on goals that aren't so smart, to be able to demonstrate for them, as we've done in the past, how difficult it is to be able to have some of those discussions. But that's a great question. The next question is, how many goals should a person have? That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? I like the number 5. It's enough to be, especially if you're weighting goals, to be able to give people the opportunity to, if they didn't hit one of their goals, that they're still going to be okay with an overall score. I don't like 462,000 goals for each person, because obviously that minimizes their effectiveness, and they just get stretched way too thin and probably won't end up accomplishing anything. As you rise in the organization, you go up in the organization's managers and directors and VPs, they might be able to have a couple more than 5. But I like that number 5 because it's easy for people to be able to articulate, these are my 5 goals, and it gives them the opportunity for some flexibility with that. But it's not an exact science. You could ask 10 other people that are experts in performance management, and they may give you 10 different answers, but that's just my 2 cents. The next question is, can goals change throughout the year? My response to that is absolutely they can and should. I mean, if you think about it, we attempt to build our goals probably at the end of the previous year, so that we can have our goals in place by the beginning of the year. And if I think about how many things could change from when I set a goal for myself in November of or December of one year all the way through the next year, that could be pretty significant, and a number of changes could happen that would alter my goals. Now, we're not just going to change goals just because we don't think that we're going to hit a goal and the goal is still relevant. But if something changes in the makeup of my job, or I move from one job to another, I should probably have all different goals. If something majorly changes, a priority changes for me, the competition does something different in our service area, or there's a new product that comes out from a supplier, whatever that might be, those would be things that might warrant considering changing some of our goals. And it should be a malleable, changeable process, but it should be a collective process that involves both the manager and the employee. So we don't want the employee just going in there willy-nilly changing a bunch of their goals without some conversation with their manager. And likewise, we don't want managers going in and just changing a bunch of goals without having a discussion with the employee on why that is. But we should always consider our goals aren't set in stone, but if something changes in the industry, in our role, with the competition in our market area, that might change our priority and how we choose to shift our attention, then we might look at making some additions or changes to our goals. Well, these are great questions, guys. Thank you. If you happen to come up with any other questions, as sometimes happens when we end a call, we slap our heads and say, oh gosh, I wish I could have had an opportunity to ask this other question, but I didn't think about it. Feel free to email us at any time or contact us. Give us a call at ASA, and we'll be happy to have a follow-up conversation with you about this. I'm just so pleased to be able to help out with adding value for the Women in Industry group within ASA. I think it's a great opportunity to be able to share some best practices and get people together to be able to have some conversations and continuing the networking value proposition that ASA gives. As a reminder to everyone, for additional information about Women in Industry, the link is on the screen in front of you, but it's also pasted in the chat function. Scroll up to where Chris Olson was able to dump that, and either click on it directly in the chat function box or cut and paste it into a URL, and you'll be taken directly there. If there are no other questions,